As a kid and as a really big fantasy and Lord of the Rings fan, even from a very young age, I always wanted to be an elf. I wanted to be tall and graceful, to have the long flowing hair, possibly to be able to ride a horse. But as I've got older, I've had to admit to myself that there is nothing particularly elven about me. I believe the casting instructions for the Hobbit extras in The Lord of the Rings were to be under 5'3" and have round faces, and that actually fits me perfectly. So I have come to embrace my hobbitiness over the years. I may not live in a nice hole in the ground, but I am here in the English countryside on our small holding, soaking up as much of the Hobbit life as I can. So we are going to go full on Hobbit this week as much as possible. There is going to be baking and gardening, getting outside in the woods and the fields, and of course reading as much as possible. So let's start by talking about what I'm reading this week. So I have got 2 books on the go this week. First of all, we have got The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is the one that I'm the furthest into. I have about 200 pages left. Now, the tagline on the front of this says, "Every empire demands revolution," and that really sums the book up well. It is a very political secondary world fantasy set in a period of colonialism, of empire building, also of technology like early guns. There is a little bit of magic, but it is very much in the background in favour of the world building and the characters and the politics. There's obviously a lot of talk about empire, there is a rebellion, there are lots of sapphic relationships. The writing is fantastic. This is very character-driven fantasy. It drew me in really quickly. So I am enjoying this a lot and I am hoping to finish it this week. The other book which I have just started, which is on my e-reader, is Silent Hall by N.S. Dolcart. Now, I'm only a few chapters into this one. It starts off with loads of points of view. We are meeting a group of characters who are going to have to flee when their island home is destroyed. Other than that, I don't know a great deal about the story. Some of the blurbs have promised me gods and a wizard and possibly dragons, which all sounds fantastic. I am definitely in the mood for some classic fantasy. I can't tell you much more than that at this point, but I will definitely be reading more as the week goes on. We're starting the hobbity activities with some baking. I have already made some ordinary brown loaves. This is the kind of ordinary bread that I make every couple of days. So that's done first. Now I'm going to make some fruit tea cakes. That's the tea cake dough finished with. They look pretty small at this point, but they have quite a bit of rising to do before they go into the oven. And look, here's the stack of books I was resting my camera on. Let me show you them. We have got The Skeleton Key by Erin Kelly. I think this is some kind of mystery, and I do read a reasonable number of mysteries, but I don't really know anything about this one. It was just on offer in the bookshop, and at the same time as that one, I bought The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. Now, I have a bit of a hard time with romantasy, I have to admit. I may vlog reading this one because it could be interesting, but I've seen so much hype for this one and I thought I would give it a go. And finally, we have a bit safer of a bet, which is City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, I've read Adrian Tchaikovsky's work before, I've really enjoyed it. I think he is one of the most interesting British fantasy authors working at the moment, and he's incredibly prolific. So I'm really looking forward to this one. I have about 100 pages of The Unbroken left to read, and the story is getting increasingly tense. Throughout the book, we are following two women. One is Princess Luca. She is a young woman trying to gain control of her throne, and she has been sent to one of her empire's colonies to try and gain control over it. And our other main character is Touraine. She is a conscripted soldier who comes from the colony that the book is set in, but has spent her life fighting for the Empire. Now, you can probably tell from that setup alone that there is a lot of tension between these two characters and the other characters around them. And this is just made stronger by a budding rebellion in the colony. There are definitely sides within this conflict, but Luca and Touraine are not always on the same one. Sometimes they are allies, sometimes they are on opposing sides. There is a huge amount of betrayal and shifting loyalties and allegiances. And I honestly can't tell where the end of the book is going. At the point I am at now, Touraine has given her allegiance to one side in the conflict, but that seems to be fracturing and she is being forced back to the other side. And through all this conflict, there is a running thread of talking about magic, which Luca is trying to find more information about and gain control of from the colony. I think my one complaint about the book so far is that the magic has very much been off the page. There have also been a lot of references to a kind of ruined, possibly haunted city on the other side of the river in another country, with a fabled library that is supposedly still there in the ruins. But the characters have not made it there, and I have a feeling they're not going to in this book. We will see though, because there are another 100 pages to go, so I am crossing my fingers. So my plans for the rest of the day now are to head out, get out into the woods hopefully, go for a walk while the sun is shining, and then it will be back for a cosy reading evening at home tonight.
I know a place where we can go and be alone. So come away with me, nobody has to know where we gonna go. I was just calling to see if you're free to run away with me, to run away with me.
Good morning. It is another grey, cloudy and cold one, which is par for the course in an English summer. I wanted to have a little talk about cottagecore as an aesthetic and hobbitcore in general. So let's find somewhere to sit and do that. I think what we tend to see online when we search for hobbitcore definitely is the aesthetic side of it. Now that's for obvious reasons. Pretty dresses and nice outfits just work well on screen. And the internet really does love any kind of aesthetic that can be slotted into a neat little box. But for me, the fashion side of hobbitcore is really the least interesting part of it. And it's the part that has the least impact on my life. As you may have noticed from this vlog, I have not worn a dress or a frilly shirt or a corset once in this entire video. T-shirts and leggings and trainers are pretty much what you will find me in most of the time. And I'm certainly not averse to the hobbitcore style. I think it looks fantastic, but it's just not as important for me personally as some other aspects of hobbitcore. I think there are maybe three main things about hobbitcore: cottagecore, slow living, whatever you want to call it, that really stand out to me. The first one is getting outside, and particularly having an appreciation for the natural world, for the passing seasons. Now, I know not everyone is lucky enough to live surrounded by glorious countryside, but I think even if you live in a city, there are things you can incorporate into your daily life that will give you an appreciation of the natural world. Just watching day by day or week by week the buds opening on trees in spring or leaves starting to yellow and then fall off in autumn really gives us a sense of the passing of time that I think our busy modern lives can lack. You cannot hurry or change the turning of the year, and I think it's sometimes good to remember that. And of course, there are so many studies about how being outside, being surrounded by green, nature sounds is just so good for us. I know I always feel a lot better when I've been outside. The second big aspect of Hobbitcore for me is food, and particularly making a lot of my own food. You have already seen me in this vlog baking, and I'm not just doing that for the sake of the camera. That really is a week in, week out occurrence for me. I bake bread every couple of days. I have a session usually once a week where I bake lots of sweet treats, and I do tend to cook mostly from scratch pretty much every day. Part of that is for practical reasons. There are not many restaurants around here. It is a really long drive even to get a takeaway. Also, it is just cheaper to cook at home from scratch. And we do live quite a minimal and frugal lifestyle here. And the other thing really is that I just like food. I like eating. And the best way for me to be able to eat exactly what I want and have it prepared exactly as I like it is to make it myself. Food also has a really nice community aspect to it for me though. Nothing quite brings people together like food, whether that is cooking a meal for a family, for a wider circle of family and friends. I also cook a lot for community events, school events, get-togethers with neighbours, and when you also add music into the mix, you have the beginnings of a party, which is a very hobbity thing to do. I do think sometimes we have lost a sense of local community in the modern age, and while simply cooking for a few local events is not going to immediately solve that, it is a step in the right direction, and it does definitely bring people together. And the final aspect of Hobbitcore, which really ties it all together for me, is the slow living aspect. We are here in the countryside, we are self-employed, we are building a house, raising our daughter. The things we have chosen to build our life around are perhaps a little different from the norm. The things that interest me in life the most are, for example, food and getting outside, but also having freedom with my time, being able to live somewhere that I really, really love and which lifts me up rather than making me feel depressed. And there are certainly things we've given up to achieve that. We do not earn a great deal of money. We are currently living in this tiny and very dated static caravan so that we can work on our house build. There are certainly no fancy cars, no foreign holidays, not much travel at all, if I'm honest, in our lives. And if someone asked me to go on a very big adventure, whether that involved dragons or rings, I would probably be running pretty fast in the opposite direction. But this is a lifestyle that has allowed us to embrace the things that I think would be also really important to a Hobbit community. Free time, sitting outside in the sun, eating good food, getting together with friends and family, and just generally enjoying life rather than rushing through it. So here's one piece of my tiny vegetable patch, here's the other, and here's the building site and our future home that you can see in the other direction. In here we have got some chilies just starting to form there on the left. I've got 3 tomato plants. This one is not looking very happy. This one over here on the right is doing much better. And we have tiny tomatoes starting to form. I've now read about the first 100 pages of Silent Hall, so I wanted to chat a little bit more about the story. Now, as I said earlier, we are following a cast of characters who have escaped from a cursed island. This is a multi-POV story. We have 5 main characters who have all either been sent away from the island or have fled for varying reasons. They're all young, but they're all quite a diverse group of characters. We have, for example, a young man who accidentally murdered someone and is fleeing. We have a boy who is descended from dragons and has been hiding that his whole life. We have a girl who was raised by a wolf in the forest. And this group of characters has made it away from the island onto the mainland and are now trying to work out what to do with their lives because everything they have ever known has been destroyed. Now, I will say the curse that struck the island was an interesting one. It did take me by surprise. I had had an idea that the island was going to be flooded, and that is not what happens. I actually think the curse is more interesting than that. The real focus of the book, though, is on these 5 main characters. I do like some of them more than others, but I think that is to be expected in a multi-POV book like this. I'm also really enjoying the world. There are a lot of different gods in this setting who are portrayed as often being at war with each other. A lot of them are related to one another, and the human characters relate to the gods by giving them offerings, by performing sacrifices. There's definitely a bit of a classical Roman feel to this world, and particularly to the religion. But at the same time, it does very much feel like high fantasy. I'm reminded most of all of the fantasy books I grew up reading. I'm thinking of authors like Terry Brooks, for example. I think my one criticism of Silent Hall in the first 100 pages is that it perhaps feels a little bit old-fashioned. Now, I do love a good classic adventure or epic fantasy. That isn't really my complaint. The writing, though, is quite formal, and some of the character dialogue does feel quite stilted. It is still an easy read regardless of that, but in some ways the writing style does feel a bit dated when compared to most of modern fantasy. And whether you enjoy that or not is really going to depend on what you are looking for from your fantasy. Now, I will say I haven't quite finished The Unbroken. I have maybe 70 pages left, but this feels like a good time to wrap this vlog up. I hope you have enjoyed coming along for this Hobbitcore week with me. It has been a bit of a glimpse into my life, into the kind of cottagecore things I do regularly, and I would love to hear from you. Please tell me down in the comments what cottagecore activities you like to do, or tell me what you are reading this week. I will be moving on to some more very fun fantasy books very soon, and I will be vlogging that, so stay tuned. Until then, keep reading everyone, and I'll see you next time.